remarkable story unfolding. A U.S. airplane, an A320 Airbus, heading from LaGuardia to Charlotte, taking off about 3:16, got up to just taking off 6 minutes into the flight, about 3,200 feet above the ground. And when something happened, we believe some sort of a flock of birds, perhaps geese, had hit, and you can see just the back wing, the tail wing of that U.S. Airways jet with 146 passengers, 5 crew members on board. We do not know if all the passengers are out yet. We have one report. Source of mine at the FDNY says they believe all the passengers are out. We would hope so. Shannon Sohn has been on top of this in Newscopter 7. Shannon, we understand you have some new information.
Yeah, Bill, we can certainly add some information at this point. The towers are telling us that they do, in fact, believe that everyone got out of this aircraft okay, which is absolutely amazing. But let's give you a little bit of information about what was probably going on inside the fuselage of that aircraft when this all happened. As you mentioned, they took off out of LaGuardia. They were 6 minutes into their flight when they encountered some sort of problem. Initial reports are a bird strike. We, too, here in Newscopter 7 are hearing reports of a flock of seagulls in the area that may have caused this catastrophe. But keep in mind, the pilot was aware of it as well. And so whatever happened, the pilot knew what was going on, and he took the proper safety precautions. So what that means for the people inside that aircraft at the time that the bird struck or whatever happened is that they knew what was coming down the line. So the pilot knew what to do. He controlled the landing into the water. Unfortunately, it was the only place that he could go. But also keep in mind, with an Airbus like this, the worst parts of the flight are on takeoff and on landing. That is when the engines are working the hardest. That is when the plane is doing the most work. So as everyone has mentioned, that is the worst time to have something happen, and that's probably why this ended the way it did. But again, the pilots handled the situation. They landed it into the water, and from what the towers are telling us, it looks like everyone got out. Now, you can imagine how intense it was.
Shannon, explain to us what we think, I think we're seeing, and you have a better view of it up there. It looks like there are tow lines from these New York waterway ferries, which, by the way, you'll recall in 9/11 did a heroic job, and they plunged into action here as well very quickly. And who knows how many lives they saved by the quick action. But it looks like there are tow lines, and they're trying to get that to shore before the whole body goes underneath.
Yeah, I think that they're just trying to keep it afloat for the most part. The current is fairly strong here today, and it is actually moving southbound in addition to the fact that it is attached to these tows. But the aircraft itself, because of the current, is moving southbound. So they're just sort of trying to keep it afloat.
Jeff Pegues is at the scene. Jeff, what can you tell us about the rescue operation now? And we are told everyone's off. Are they all away from that waterfront now?
Well, it's hard for us to see, Bill, exactly what's happening with the rescue effort. We are, though, at the Circle Line Pier, and this has become a staging area for some of the rescue crews behind us. And it is also where many witnesses are gathering as well. I have one with me here. His name is Angel. He tells me that he saw the plane coming down over the Hudson. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, tell me exactly what you saw.
From my window, I saw the plane was coming down below the radar zone. I thought it might be a terrorist attack or something, but the plane looked like it had difficulty trying to get off.
Trying to gain altitude.
Trying to gain altitude, but as it got closer to the water, I saw the pilot. He made a last-ditch effort to try to gain altitude, and he did that for a few seconds, and then the plane just came down and plopped on the water. Had he not done that, he would have damaged the fuselage.
I know the plane was coming down. Was this a relatively soft landing, considering the speed that the plane was traveling at?
Had he not made that last-ditch effort, it would have not been a soft landing. He would have damaged the fuselage and endangered the lives of those people on the plane.
And you were telling me also that you tried to call 911, but
I tried to call 911, and I tried to call the news channels, but all the phones were blocked. I couldn't get through.
Angel, thank you very much. Angel telling us that he saw the plane coming down over the Hudson. Again, I'm at one of the staging areas here on the west side. Traffic obviously has let up here as rescue officials have moved in. They're blocking the traffic, obviously, as they move their activity here. Back to you in the studio.
We've got Martin Rizzotti, who is on the phone right now. He was an eyewitness to the crash. Martin, tell us what you saw.
Diane, I was looking outside the window and I happened to see the plane extremely low, and my first impression was that I thought there would be another attack on 9/11. As I looked out the window, I see the plane come down without any landing gear, and this pilot miraculously brought this plane down with it was just unbelievable how he brought this plane down.
Martin,
I didn't see, yes.
Was it your sense he was controlled in his landing, that he was controlling the landing?
Oh, absolutely. He was controlling that landing. I didn't see any landing gear. All I know is he brought this plane down. Him and his guardian angel brought that plane down. And I am beside myself because I see these things on TV thinking it was some sort of fictional thing, and then when I actually see it, it's just unbelievable. It's so stressful. But this pilot is amazing how he brought that plane down, and I didn't see any crash or anything like that. I didn't hear any explosion, but he brought this plane down. I didn't see any landing gear come down. He just brought this plane down as if the plane was going to be able to land on the water.
So, Martin, what was it like when it did come down on top of the water? Did it glop?
There was a splash. There was a splash, and then I saw a splash, and then it went out of my view because I'm on 68th Street and Riverside Boulevard, and I think the plane where it is now is somewhere in the 50s or the 40s.
So you don't. Martin, you don't have a sense of how long it kind of sat on the surface of the water before it started going down?
No, I don't. All I know is that I tried calling 911, but they didn't pick up because I know they needed help. I went downstairs to the concierge to see if maybe they can get through, but then I called your control room, and your control room said you already had the news story. But it's just amazing how this pilot brought that plane down like he knew what he had to do. He had to land that plane on the water.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely miraculous how that plane did not explode.
Well, this is really encouraging news, Martin, because we don't know if how many survivors, if there are any survivors, but it does sound much more hopeful with what you're describing.
They were standing on the wings, and these ferries were taking them over.
So that's again sounding very hopeful, Martin. We like hearing that. So thank you, Martin Rosati, a witness to it. Thank you so much.
And good luck.
Okay, I want to add a couple bits and pieces of information because again we keep getting more information. Government officials say 2 engines of the plane that went down in the Hudson River were disabled by a bird strike. The Federal Aviation Administration is saying that the U.S. Airways Flight 1549 had just taken off from LaGuardia en route to Charlotte. We've got Dave Evans, who is on the scene right now, and I understand we can get a live shot with him, so let's take it down to Dave. Dave?
Dinah, for the last 10 or 15 minutes or so, we've been seeing this plane basically towed down the Hudson River south here along the Hudson. And just a couple of minutes ago, I talked with John Roca. He is a photographer with the Daily News, and we'll try to get that taped for you in just a minute. But he tells me that about probably 15 or 20 minutes ago, he saw several of the people who were passengers apparently on this flight, about 15 or 20 people who came out on top of the plane as it floated there in the Hudson. And then those people were brought by police dinghies. They all had their life vests on them. He said they appeared to be fine. They were shaken up, of course, by what happened, but he said he didn't see anyone injured in that first dinghy that came, the police dinghy, from that flight, and were brought then to about 42nd Street, just north of where we are right now. Right now we are at 34th Street, but for the last 15 minutes or so, we've seen the plane basically towed down the Hudson River. No one is on the plane now that we see. We assume that all of the passengers have been brought now up at 42nd Street here along the Hudson River, and miraculously, according to the photographer from the Daily News who I talked to just a few minutes ago, they all appear to be fine.
We go up to Shannon Sona. Shannon, do you hear us?
I hear you, Bill.
Okay. We understand they are trying to tow this plane to dock. So there's got to be something attached to that big tugboat, right?
Oh, absolutely. It looks to us like they are trying to tow it. It almost looks like they're pushing it towards the Jersey side here. You can see the tail still sticking out on the left side of your picture, and right around where the police boat is, that is where the nose of the airplane is still sticking out of the water. And to give you an idea of how large this aircraft is, we all know it's an Airbus 320 at this point. Just to give you some stats on the aircraft, it has a wingspan of 111.2 feet, and that is all underwater. There's one wing, the left wing, sticking out above the water, which you can't see right now because of the tugboat in front of it, 123 feet long. That's how big this aircraft is, and so much of it at this point is underwater. And as we mentioned, 146 passengers on board. They got out quickly. Now keep in mind as well that this guy had just taken off out of LaGuardia 6 minutes before impacting into the Hudson River, and that means he was still on LaGuardia's radar, and he let LaGuardia know that there was a problem, so everyone knew exactly where he was and pretty much the position that he was going to wind up in. So emergency crews were probably standing by for something to happen almost before the crash site actually happened. So they certainly got help out here fast. We're just going to widen this picture out for a minute to give you an idea of how many boats are in this water. We've got helicopters overhead that were quickly there to look for anyone that might be in the water. We've got circle line boats. We've got police boats. Everyone that you can imagine came and responded to the scene quickly. But it sounds like they went into the water and were able to get out onto the wings. Most of the passengers that we have seen coming off of the aircraft aren't even wet, and that is really key today because the weather is cold and that water is absolutely frigid.
We've got Jessica Taff on the phone right now, and she is with someone who got off that plane, right, Jess?
And we just got off safe. And
Jess, are you there? Jessica?
Just walked through water. And
where's your wife?
it was filled up probably to our waist by the time we got off, and it was going down a lot quicker than that. I mean, you can see now there's no plane in the Hudson. So,
Where were you in the plane?
I was 22A. I was far back.
Did you go up to the front door?
Yeah, we were supposed to go out to the back. So, but I don't know. It was organized chaos. So,
How many exits were used?
I don't even know, man. We were just looking to be calm and walk in a straight line and make sure the women. I think we were trying to make sure as hard as we could to make sure that the women got off. So, man, it was.
What did you say?
I'm just happy to be alive. To be honest, I don't know what else to say. So thank you.
Did you step into a raft?
Yeah. Well, we kind of walked in, jumped in, or stepped into a raft, and
Okay.
I'm 31 years old, man.
What's your name?
Yeah, it's KOLODJAY.
It sounds like what we're listening into, by the way, if
My
you're
wife?
listening into this, is one of the passengers on board is speaking to a number of media members out there, and he is describing what it was like. He was in seat 22A, and that was his description of what was happening as they were trying to get people out of the plane.
But we also have Jim Hoffer here, who's going to take us into what may have happened, and we were talking about these birds here.
Well, the bird strike, it looks like, that at least preliminarily, that is exactly what happened here. That's what we're hearing. We've confirmed it through air traffic control that indeed that's what the pilot radioed just prior to the crash. The question here is how severe was the strike in terms of did it take out one engine? Did it take out two engines? Or that's the big question. If it's a multiple bird strike, then they can be catastrophic. They're rare. And oftentimes they happen more in smaller planes than they do larger ones.
Jim, the information we got was that it did disable two engines. Now, very unusual.
It's unusual, but that is indeed why that plane is now in the water, clearly. Because had one engine only been damaged, that pilot would have been able to bring that plane down, probably even circle around and take it back to LaGuardia safely, or even Newark, which is closer at that point.
If a pilot loses two engines, what kind of predicament does that put him into?
Well, he's got to decide where to bring the plane down at that point.
And immediately,
at that
right?
point,
right.
He had no other options.
He probably had seconds to decide whether he could get that plane and take it back to the airport or bring it down somewhere. And the fact that he had presence of mind to bring that plane down over the water is probably why so many people were alive today.
Just to recap, again, it was a U.S. Airways plane that crashed into the Hudson. It was coming from LaGuardia Airport on its way to Charlotte, North Carolina. 146 passengers on board, 5 crew members, and again, it was an Airbus 320 plane.
Coming from LaGuardia. The pilot really did a fantastic job. We're Shannon Sona's in Newscopter 7. We also have on our set Dr. Jay Adlersberg, because those passengers, 146 passengers, 5 crew members, all were told getting out in time, but 42-degree weather, Jay, with a wind chill factor, pretty close to zero with the wind and the cold right now, according to Lee Goldberg, we're almost in the single digits. How long can someone survive in 42-degree water?
Well, unfortunately, Bill, I think that what we saw as the survivors of the crash entered into emergency care was that very little of their clothing appeared wet. So I think these people were fortunate enough to get out of the fuselage of the plane onto the wing, onto a boat without getting wet. So they were exposed perhaps to the single-digit wind chill type temperatures of the air.
But in dry clothes.
In dry clothes. Now, if they had entered the water is about 42 degrees Fahrenheit, as I understand. Yeah. And at that temperature...
It could have been a different scenario there
absolutely,
altogether.
Completely, because people in water of that temperature survive about 30 minutes to an hour before they begin to lose consciousness or to act irrationally, etc. Fortunately, nothing like that happened. This is that's the worst case scenario, and it doesn't appear that anybody, so far as we know, was in the water. But I'm sure we have more information to get on that.
These are pictures right now. Passengers being brought to shore. Passengers brought to shore. And they are looking good right there. That is a good sight to see. So they look like they're doing good. Again, there's no fatalities reported. This could turn out to be just quite an amazing miracle that all of these passengers may perhaps be okay. Surely they are shaken up. They must be very frightened. But as you heard from Martin just a short while ago, this was a miraculous landing by that pilot after what appears to have been a bird strike. He landed that plane on the Hudson River, and now what you're seeing here is passengers, raw video of these passengers who are off that plane and being taken to be checked out, to obviously warm up, but these are passengers from U.S. Airways Flight 1549. They were headed to Charlotte, and then their plane went down in the Hudson River. And you can look at this gentleman here. They are surely shaken up. That man smiling, thankful, obviously, to be alive. Hallelujah for him.
Jessica, we couldn't actually see it, so kind of, if you could describe it for us. How's he look? We've heard his voice, but how's he looking right now? Is he wet? Is he? Describe the scene for us, if you could.
What's funny is I saw him when he first got off, and I went over to talk to him, and he seemed actually more calm when he just got off the plane. And now I think it seems the reality is sitting in. I saw him actually finally shed the first tears that I've seen him since he's been off that plane. And I think it's just now finally starting to hit him how big this is and how disastrous it could have been. And right now, I think it's just all setting in as he talks about his family. He didn't actually, I didn't see him even start tearing up at all until he started talking about his wife. And he said, I'm not sure if you could hear him, he's 31 years old and he has a child on the way right now. So, I mean, this guy has a lot going on. He does medical sales, and he just, right now, I think his whole family kind of flashed before his eyes in his life. And I think right now he's just very, very thankful to be alive.
Jessica, one thing that he had mentioned, that he was on the phone with his wife when the plane had gone down. Can you tell us, if you even know, what he shared with his wife during that time?
He said he didn't. He just said he was on the phone. He called her, I believe, afterwards. She was at work. He was able to talk to her then. I think he just said he was okay. Literally, since he's been off the plane, he hasn't had much time to talk to anybody because there's been so many people around here, and of course, people wanting to know how he got off the plane, how he's doing, how everybody else was able to get off. So right now I think he's just trying to basically get somewhere and get warm because it is absolutely freezing out here. He's been outside talking to people. He said, I know a lot of people have asked him for interviews and to do a lot of things because this is such a huge story. And he said, I really don't want to benefit from something like this. I don't want to be the spokesperson or be the face for this thing, that's something that was so bad. I don't want to benefit at all. I'm just happy to be alive.
Understandable. Jess, I have to ask, did he say anything about the pilot? Because certainly that pilot did a heroic job landing that plane.
He said that the pilot actually was very good. The fact that they were calm, and then just the fact that he said they just said, just you need to brace for impact. But he said he's just happy to be alive, and he is so thankful to be alive for that pilot because they said as soon as they hit, the water was already filling up the plane, and they were getting in boats and they were making sure women and children were getting off first, but they were able to fill those safety boats up pretty quick and get everybody off. But he's just glad that, as far as he knew, I asked him specifically, did everybody get off the plane okay? And he said, as far as I know, I saw everybody getting off, and whoever wasn't in my boat, everybody's going to the other side. The last he saw, he thinks everybody got off the plane. Whether or not that's true or not, I'm not sure. But from what he's saying, and I think he was on the 22nd, aisle 22, I believe is what he said. He was able to see everybody get off.
We're going to go right now to Lauren Glassberg. She is in our Eyewitness newsroom right now. She's been taking a look at the impact of a bird strike on a jet, and she's going to tell us a little bit more right now about what kind of impact that can have on a big jet like that.
Diana, Shannon really pinpointed exactly the problem when the plane is on takeoff and those engines are working especially hard. That is when the biggest problem can occur. Most bird strikes do occur, oddly enough, at airports or near the runways when the planes are about 100 feet or lower. That is generally where the birds are flying, although they do occur at higher altitudes as well. According to some of the statistics that we found from the FAA, only about 15% of bird strikes do any damage to airplanes. And of course, birds can hit any part of the plane, the nose, the wing, but it's when they hit the engine that's when the problems can occur. And these birds we're talking about are 10 to 12 pounds, and it's when a flock of birds hits a plane that can do tremendous damage, at times making it so bad that a pilot can't recover control of the plane, which, despite today's miraculous landing in the water, looks to be what caused the pilot to have veered into the water in the first place. Some history. Back in 1960, an Eastern Airlines flight that was leaving Boston hit a flock of birds during takeoff. That affected all 4 engines of that plane. The plane crashed in Boston Harbor, and there were 62 fatalities. That was the most fatal incident that we have on record of a bird strike. The FAA says since 1988, there have been 200 worldwide deaths because of bird strikes, and there are actually controls when it comes to standards for engines and jet engines about bird ingestion, because they understand this can be a problem, so they make sure that the jet engines are built in such a way that birds can't get through, although, of course, this can happen. So for the most part, these occur on takeoff and on landing, and it's the takeoff stage that can cause the most problems, these bird strikes.
As a result of this, you have to wonder, what's the FAA going to do? They're going to have to start looking at this as a very serious problem.
Well, they already do. They have controls on this. You know, airports monitor birds. They have ways of trying to get the birds off the runways and out of their areas. There are a number of ways they go about doing that. But it is a rare thing. I mean, 15% of bird strikes do any damage. That's a very small number, but they do monitor it. And they say it's really on that lower part where the descent or the ascent starts. That's where they are concerned. But again, they have standards in place for jet engines to make sure these birds can't get through, but it happens.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, Lauren, thank you very much. We now want to go to Kevin Johns, who is a witness of the event. Kevin, thank you for joining us. Can you tell us, where were you and what did you see?
Well, at about 3 o'clock, I was going south on the Henry Hudson Parkway, dropping people off on 14th Street, and I saw the Circle Liner going down the river, and I said to the guys in the car, boy, it must be cold out there. And then coming back up, I was just about at the George Washington Bridge, and I saw the aircraft very, very low, and I said, that guy's low. And I looked up, and there were flames coming out of the number 1 engine. I actually saw the flames, and I heard the sputtering. I was a jet engine mechanic in the Air Force for 5 years, so I knew what I was looking at. And I knew that the plane was in trouble. I called 911 right away. I got through to 911. I told the lady what was going on. She transferred me to the fire department. They picked up on it right away, and it must have been a minute after that it must have got down to around the 40s and it went into the river. But I knew it was going in the river.
And what was going through your mind once you saw that plane crashed?
Well, I didn't see it crash, but I when I saw it so low, I thought right away of 9/11. I spent 11 months down at 9/11, and I saw that plane, and it just freaked me out. But I knew when I looked up and I saw the flames, I knew it was a mechanical problem. And when I first saw the plane, I was scared about a terrorist thing, thinking maybe it was going for the GW or something, but it wasn't. I saw the flames, and I knew it was in trouble, and that's why I called 911 right away to let them know that there was a plane in trouble. I thought it was trying to head for Newark or something.
But Kevin, you say you saw flames coming only out of engine number 1.
I couldn't see engine number 2. When the plane came at me, I could see both intakes, but I couldn't see both exhausts. When I looked up, I could see the number 1 engine, because you look at the rear of an aircraft, and it's left-right on the numbers of the engine. So I saw the flames coming out of number 1 engine.
And do you have a sense of how high the jet was off the water at that point?
I would say it was about maybe 20 stories high at that point.
So you were looking kind of at the belly of the jet a little bit, too,
I was
right?
looking at the belly, and I saw the flames coming out of the number 1 engine.
Okay, and then on his descent, you know, as a mechanic or you know jets, what was the degree of his descent?
He was going slow. This pilot was an ace. He knew exactly what he was doing. There were no jerky motions to the aircraft. The aircraft was gliding slowly. You know, he must have had it on low power. And you have to commend this pilot. He did some job.
So low power coming in very slowly, making obviously not a very steep descent, a very flat descent?
No, very controlled descent. He was very controlled. Even though his engine was in trouble, I'm sure he was smart enough to get over the Hudson River. And, he just, from what I can understand, he just landed it perfectly in the water.
And he was able to keep the nose up.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I didn't sense the plane was in trouble when I first saw the aircraft. But then when I realized how low it was, and I looked up and I saw actual flames coming out of the number 1 engine. And a bird strike would make absolute sense. I don't know how many engines I had to shoot intakes on when they got hit by birds on F-111s.
So you've had experience with this. You know that pilots, this is something that they've had to deal with, and that it can be disastrous.
You always have to deal with a bird strike, and sometimes it's not that bad a damage. I mean, it smells horrible if you climb inside the intake, especially on a fighter bomber. But on a commercial jet, their engines are bigger and they're more in open space. So if they get hit by a bird, you got to remember I know on a 111 they had 16 stages of blades. So a bird goes, it might hit the first 2 blades. But if it gets into the combustion chamber, and where the fuel's coming into the combustion chamber, and you throw something off in there, now you have ignition in there, and now all your fuel rings are off and everything, and that's what probably caused the fire. And he wasn't getting his proper power.
He wasn't
getting
that.
That's going to cause you all kinds of problems.
So, Kevin, I have to wonder, because you do seem to know a little bit about this, or quite a bit about this. Can a single bird do this, or is it generally a flock of birds that
It's usually a flock of birds.
A flock of birds.
So it's a number of birds
Unless
that would have been...
one big bird. It could be a big bird. It could do, it's all dependent on how it hits, where it hits. I remember going into an intake and just filing down the blades. There were limits set that even after a bird strike that you could file down some of the blades if it didn't go all the way through. When I'm talking in the late 70s, early 80s, but that's how they handled it in the Air Force.
Okay, so it's your experience that it takes several birds, because we heard from Lauren Glassberg that each bird weighs roughly 10 to 12 pounds.
Depends on what kind. Were they geese? Were they pigeons?
Yeah, we don't know.
Seagulls? You don't know what it was, If you hit a flock of geese, those are big birds.
Those are big birds. You're absolutely right, Kevin.
Diana, we have another person on the phone who is a witness to this. We have Jim Hobbs joining us now. Jim, thank you. Can you tell us what you saw?
I live on the 18th floor of a high-rise on the Hoboken side of the Hudson, and I was out on my terrace, and I saw the plane, and I thought it was flying awfully low, and there was no landing gear down. It was very smooth. It wasn't rocking back and forth, and I was watching, and then all of a sudden it just went right into the water, and a big spray of water went up. And then it started floating, and it happened closer on the Hoboken side, and then right across from the Intrepid. And then it started going over toward the current took the plane over toward the Intrepid in the middle of, and all the ferry boats just rushed to it within seconds. I was on the phone actually with your people when the boats were finally getting to them.
Were you amazed at how quickly they got to the jet? And do you think they had advance? In advance. I mean, this was 6 minutes between takeoff and when the jet went down. But I would assume he may have called the control tower, so there was some word that some trouble was happening on board that flight.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I'm a flight attendant, so I could tell that this was a planned emergency, and I had heard some people saying before you would ask them what exits they use, and when you do have a ditching, when you land in the water, you don't use the back exits because that makes the plane sink further. So they probably just used I saw the aircraft right door, the galley door in the front of the aircraft. I saw that pop open, and I saw people coming out of that immediately.
So you saw it immediately.
And I could not tell if they were using the overwing exits or not, but I know definitely they would not use the rear exits.
Could you tell when they were getting out, did they have the life preservers around their necks, a lot of them, as they were just getting out onto that wing?
Yes, they did. They had on. And
Those life
I
vests.
actually have a telescope, so I was looking through the telescope while I was talking to your channel at the same time, explaining to him what was going on. There was no rocking, there was no fires coming out of the engine. It was very quiet, so I'm not sure, like I said, I'm a flight attendant, not a pilot, but he must have cut the engines because it was very quiet. It was very quiet until it hit the water, and I could actually hear that from my building.
And
So
Jim, that's
interesting-
actually what we heard from the other person, just talking about the pilot, how smooth it was, and like he was just going in for a landing. So this sentiment is being shared by many people. He was just very calm.
Yes, it was. It was very calm, and what amazed me was the way that the plane, like I said, it happened closer to the Hoboken side of the Hudson, and then the current just took it right to the middle of the river before any of the helicopters got there. And one of the water taxis, New York water taxis, was there, like I said to you, was there within 3 seconds, not even a minute. It was there within 3 seconds, and I thought, was it a rescue boat? And then as I looked through my telescope, I saw the NYC waterway on it, and then another one, and then one of those yellow taxi boats came. It was actually all the ferries before the emergency vehicles got there.
Jim, I want to pick
Emergency
up on something you said a moment ago, that you're a flight attendant, correct?
Yes.
Tell us, what exactly would you have been telling passengers as you have, I'm sure at that point, gotten word from the pilot that there's trouble? What would you have been telling passengers and directing them to do?
Well, if we had the notice from the captain what was happening, we would have had everyone prepare and get their life vests from underneath their seats and have them put on their life vests. And then as you land, you yell out the command, bend over, heads down, bend over, heads down. And then the flight attendant sitting in the back would have to block the back two exits because you don't use the back exits in a water landing. And so the flight attendants in the back would have been saying exit block, go this way, and then they would have, if they had had time, they would have briefed passengers to open up the emergency exits at the overwings, showed them how to do that, asked for, we call them able-bodied assistance. We would have asked for, like somebody strong enough to pull those plugs out of the plane and they direct people out that way, and the flight attendants at the front of the aircraft would be having people come out the door and just jump into the water. If you go out the overwing exit, you go and stand on the wings.
So you've done these in simulations, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Do the lights go out in a simulation exercise? Would the lights have gone out? What would have happened? Help us play this through with us. What would have happened once that jet had hit the water?
Well, we have there is emergency lights. There's emergency lights that, like when you see on the plane, that run along the bottom of the floor, and those happens. Those go on in any kind of an emergency. They're never cut off. They can either be turned on in the cockpit or from a flight attendant jump seat. But on this Airbus plane, I'm not quite sure. The company I work for, we don't fly those aircraft, so I'm not sure where their emergency light switch is. But most of the modern day jets, they come on automatically when there is an emergency.
Well, clearly this flight attendant or flight attendants did an incredible job getting all of these passengers out to safety. So, Jim, certainly this is something that you train for all of the time, but you don't expect to go through.
No, you don't. I've been doing this for 25 years, and I've never had an emergency. I've been a flight attendant for 25 years, and I've never had to prepare.
Which airline, Jim, do you work for? Can we get that out here?
I work for another major carrier. Yeah, I work for Continental. I work for Continental Airlines.
Okay, so you fly some of the big planes, not the Airbus necessarily, but you fly some of these.
We used to have them back in the 80s, but now we just have Boeing aircraft now.
Okay.
And the Airbus isn't made by Boeing.
Right.
Well, it might now that the companies have merged, but we don't. That particular model we do not have.
Okay. Well, Jim, I just want to say thank you so much. Your insights were very helpful and invaluable, and we appreciate your calling into us and sharing that all with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I called as soon as I saw it happen. I went right to your phone number.
All right, Jim. Thank you very much.
And we've been following this since it happened earlier this afternoon. The pictures, initially shocking, really they still are, a plane down in the Hudson River. This plane was a U.S. Airways Flight 1549. It's an Airbus 320 that had taken off from LaGuardia Airport when it went down before 4 o'clock today. The flight was headed to Charlotte, North Carolina. There were 146 passengers on board, along with 5 crew members. We've been showing you video of passengers who have been rescued, all of them rescued, taken to dry land. And as of now, we are told that everyone has been rescued and that there are no deaths.
The plane went down in the Hudson around 47th Street, but floated down the Hudson. Right now, these are the first pictures of the plane moments after it crashed. We're going to have those pictures coming up, and you can see it here. This is when the plane went down, and we can see this is probably the Circle Line ferry that was there in the area that came there to try to get those passengers to safety.
It was either the Circle Line or one of the waterway ferries that were there literally within minutes after this jet went down. And you can see at this point that the fuselage is high in the water at this point, and the passengers, as we've heard descriptions from eyewitnesses, were actually able to climb out of the Airbus and get onto the wings in order to get to safety. And as that ferry pulls up, you know that those passengers are awfully glad to see it.
And Jeff Pegues, we're going to actually go to him, and he's been speaking with people. He's been speaking with some of the passengers, some of the people who have been rescuing these passengers. We're going to go to him now. Jeff, what do you have for us?
Yeah, Sade, I'm here on the West Side Highway, and behind me a lot of activity. You can probably see it. We're going to push in on it. There's a line of ambulances here, and we assume that those are for the passengers who are now on shore at the Circle Line dock at Pier 83. What a terrifying flight for them. Let me just take you through what happened. The plane in the Hudson, U.S. Air Flight 1549, going from LaGuardia to Charlotte. The plane is an Airbus 320, we're told. It took off at approximately 3:26 this afternoon, took a left turn, and then crashed into the Hudson River. According to officials, there are about 146 passengers on board and 5 crew members. Everyone on board survived, as you've heard by now, although some people suffered minor injuries. They were brought to the dock just minutes ago here at Pier 83. There were dozens of witnesses. We spoke with one of them.
Put him in the car right now. Put him in the car. Keep him warm. Jimbo, stay together. Stay right here.
Okay, and behind me, as I mentioned, a lot of activity. We have a line of ambulances here. This has been one of the staging areas for the rescue crews. We expect any minute now to see at least some of the passengers come out here, perhaps heading for some of those ambulances that are lined up behind me. Back to you in the studio.
We now want to go to Tim Fleischer, who's also on the West Side Highway near the scene of the crash. Tim, what can you tell us?
Well, Sade, I think I can pick up on what you were talking about a few minutes ago. Behind me here, at the foot of 40th Street and 12th Avenue, is the ferry terminal. This is where the passengers and the other ferries were brought in a little while ago, carrying those people. They are inside. I happened to see them inside. They were all huddled together. Some of them still had their yellow life vest on at the time. So they are in there. They're warming up. They're triaging them at this point. The ambulances are all staging in this area here outside of the pier right now. Now, some of the other passengers, as we have some video from earlier, were brought out on stretchers, 2 or 3. One woman I did see was carried out on a stretcher. She clearly, this lady right here, she clearly had some effects of the very cold weather. Her hands were blue, and they had an intravenous line working on her at that point. So clearly, some people have been injured as a result of what's happened here. Either probably trying to get out of that plane and get up to the ferry. You can see here as they were removed from the boat there, the look on their faces tell it all. They were clearly shaken by this incident, but they did, as you notice right there, they did have those yellow life vest on, so they were able to pull them off in the short time they were in the air and get them on. So they were at least prepared for that water landing as it started gliding down. One witness we have talked to, his name is Jeff Kolaje. We happened to catch him as he was phoning his father. He was on the flight, or he was phoning a relative, I should say, and let's listen in, and you can hear the tone of his voice, and it's somewhat calm, but clearly he is very upset by what happened.
You just never prepare for something like this, and I don't know. I'm sorry, my speech is probably kind of gargled, but I'm just scatterbrained right now, and just happy to be standing here, I guess, with all these people looking to ask questions, you know. So, hey, God bless, man. I'm just happy that everyone on that plane lived.
Yes, he and many others are certainly happy that they were able to get outside of that plane. Again, as I say, right behind me here, this is at the foot of 40th Street and 12th Avenue. The passengers are in the terminal here. They have been triaged at this point, and they'll be taken out in ambulances if they need the medical attention. I know that they were also given an opportunity to call their family members, since most of them originated their flight from LaGuardia here. So at that point, they're able to call their relatives and even try to get them down here if they can. That's the scene at the situation at the triage center here. Reporting live from the west side, Tim Fleischer, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
But now we want to go to Jen Maxfield, who is at St. Vincent's Hospital in the Village, where some of the passengers have been taken. Jen?
That's right. St. Vincent's is serving as a triage center. So far, 3 survivors of this plane crash have been taken here. And I will tell you that all of them looked alert and were able to speak with the paramedics who were working with them. But there is no question these people looked extremely cold. You can see that man there wrapped in blankets, these women in multiple blankets. And I'd like you to take a look at the tag that woman has around her neck. That is actually a triage tag. All of these people were determined to be well enough to go to the hospital, but certainly not need any emergency assistance, something where they had to be rushed to the hospital with any serious injury. Doctors here say that an initial assessment indicates that most of these people are suffering from hypothermia. Of course, not surprising since they were in the water on such a frigid day. But at this time, it did not appear any of these people, at least, had serious injuries. Besides that, Dr. Chris McCarthy works in the emergency room here at St. Vincent's Hospital.
What we're doing right now is converting the hospital, or the ER, as best we can into a ward for receiving patients with trauma and hypothermia. We're stretching all our resources to prepare to receive patients who are going to need rewarming and trauma care.
And these people are wet, and it is so cold out here. I mean, what are we looking at here?
Well, very unfortunately, it's a bad day to have this happen. Much like the DC crash in the 1980s, this is a bad combination of cold air, cold water, and wind.
Now, as I said, the people did seem alert. I was actually able to ask some of those people, how are you feeling? Are you okay? The gentleman you saw on the stretcher first said, yes, we're okay. And in fact, Dr. McCarthy says, assuming they do not have any other injuries besides a hypothermia, they could be warmed up here at the hospital, kept for observation for several hours, and be out of the hospital before the night is over. Diana and Sade?
You know, it's really unbelievable to hear that, Jen.
We want to go now to Stacey Sager. She is live for us at LaGuardia Airport. And Stacey, typically after an incident like this, a hotel is set up, a place where families can go to meet their loved ones. Is that the case?
That is the case, Diana. We understand the Crown Plaza Hotel, not far from LaGuardia. They have set up an area where family members can come and try to get more information. But this is a very localized event, and a lot of those relatives are heading right into Manhattan or right to New Jersey, just trying to find the people who were on that flight. You can just imagine how eerie it is here at LaGuardia. I could certainly speak to that. I mean, people got here, they were getting on flights with U.S. Airways. A couple of those flights were delayed an hour or two. There were a couple of people here who know people on that plane. We spoke to one passenger at U.S. Airways. Here is what he had to say.
Well, I think I have a coworker that was on that flight, so right now I'm trying to find out, see if she was on there or not.
She was heading to North Carolina?
Charlotte. She lives down that way, yeah. So I've called my boss to see if she could find out whether or not she was on there. I tried calling her a couple of times, and I didn't get any answer. Went straight to voicemail, and she usually takes that flight out of here on Thursdays.
And so that right there gives you an idea of just some of the uncertainty here at LaGuardia Airport. A few people like that. There was one gentleman whose brother was on the plane. People just having trouble getting information. Hopefully U.S. Airways will be giving them more information. We saw staff members being counseled on how to talk to those family members, how to reach out to them. We're sure the NTSB will hold some sort of news conference. We believe that may be closer to the site, obviously, in Manhattan. But we will keep you posted as things develop here at the airport. For now, we're live at LaGuardia. I'm Stacey Sager, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
We now want to bring in Jay Adlersberg. You've been standing by, walking us through what these passengers could expect once they actually got to the hospital.
Right. I mean, Sade, I think that the thing that we should talk about most is the fact that fortunately the people that we've seen, particularly in this video you're looking at right now, are dry. I think there were some whom we saw at St. Vincent's Hospital obviously were exposed to the elements, and I suspect because half that plane was underwater even from the first, that they were in touch with 42-degree water temperatures for a reasonable amount of time, and that's enough to induce hypothermia, which means a drop in the body temperature from normal of 98.6 is something like 93 to 97.
What does it say to you, Jay, that only 3 people have been sent to the triage unit at St. Vincent's? It says to you probably the rest of the folks are doing pretty good, right?
That's what I would think. We saw that the majority of the people in the videos that we have seen are walking, number one. Number two, they appear dry. And number 3, I think it was up to the fantastic skills of the pilot that this plane did not fill, that this plane came in smoothly and did not fill with water from a different kind of landing, a crash landing. And I think these people, their lives were saved not only because they weren't injured from impact, but they weren't exposed to the elements, particularly the cold water.
We've got Senator Chuck Schumer, who is on the phone with us right now. And Senator Schumer, I imagine at this point you've seen some of these pictures. What has been your reaction?
Well, praise God. This was just a modern miracle. When you first heard that a plane went down into the East River shuttle, you think, oh my God. And of course, I just heard it was a U.S. airline plane, you know, going either to or from LaGuardia, and that's the shuttle that I take and so many other people I know take, and I was thinking, oh my God, I wonder who I know that's on that plane. I spoke with Secretary of Transportation Mary Peters a few minutes ago, and this is all preliminary, but here's what she told me. First, the plane was brought down by a very large flock of geese that managed to disable both engines. Second, that the pilot was truly heroic. That's the preliminary indication. Obviously, you have to check up on this. But that he saw what was happening, gained a low altitude, turned the plane in the right direction, found the Hudson River, and made sure it wasn't a nose in first landing, but rather flat. And that's probably what saved everybody's life, thank God. Finally, of course, you know, after we finish our joy and relief that everyone's okay, we're going to have to look into this. A flock of geese, and we know that the New York City area has thousands and thousands of these geese, caused this plane to go down. How did it happen, and what can be done to prevent it from happening again?
Senator, I have to wonder, did you ask Mary Peters what can be done to prevent this again?
Well, I told her I wanted to call her in a couple of hours to ask about this, but she was so busy at the moment, she was nice enough to call, that I'm going to wait and talk about that. I'm sure they've thought about this, and we haven't heard it happen before, but, you know, this was a gigantic shot across the bow, and they better do everything they can to stop anything like this from happening again.
And Senator, you said this is actually a flight that you have taken many times before. Pretty unnerving.
You know, it was very nervy, and I'm planning, you know, I'm on the Estella train right now. I was planning to take the 5 o'clock back, but frankly, I had discussed with my staff if we didn't have votes late in the day of coming back and maybe on the 3 o'clock one. I thought, oh my God.
Yeah, actually, Senator, this flight was headed to Charlotte, North Carolina.
Charlotte, yeah.
Yes, it headed to Charlotte,
heard.
Yeah, so...
But the bottom line is, thank God everyone's okay, and the pilot seems to be a real modern hero.
He really does, and I have to wonder at some point if you won't have him up on the hill, if it does turn out, you know, that this is really the hero story that we all think it is.
Well, we better find the highest civilian medal that the United States can give, and I'm sure the President would want to do that.
Okay, well, Senator, we'll wait for you to find out some more information about what can be done to prevent this from ever happening again, because this time it seems like we were extremely lucky, but perhaps not if it ever happens again.
It was almost a message from the heavens. You know, you better straighten this out before anyone gets hurt.
Yeah, Senator Chuck Schumer, thanks for joining us.
Now going to take it over to Jim Hopper. And Jim, you can really tell us about the history of bird strikes.
We can talk about that, but we were able to get some additional information that tells us a little bit more, underscores just how miraculous this pilot's efforts were, because we now know from air traffic control that this plane reached an altitude probably of around 3,000 to 3,200 feet. And at that point, according to air traffic control, was going about 78 miles an hour. So you can imagine 3,000 feet at that speed, and that plane lands, and everyone comes out of there alive. I mean,
it's pretty remarkable.
How do you explain that? That's remarkable.
And we heard several witnesses say that this plane just came down. It seemed like the pilot was very calm and just kept it right in the center.
He knew exactly what he was doing. At least that's what it appears. And until we get to talk to him, I guess we won't know for sure. But I can't imagine that he just got lucky. I mean, he knew what he was doing. And from what I gather, and from what eyewitnesses have been saying, the nose plane, as he's bringing that down, is probably being pointed up because he knew that would buy the passengers more time to get out when he hit the water, because it wouldn't submerge in the river. And that time, which he was able to give because of that knowledge of landing nose up, probably saved a lot of lives.
Well, it's more of a belly flop almost going in,
Exactly.
a little bit of a belly flop. And Jim, I imagine these pilots go through this simulation testing where they have to go through this kind of situation, right?
Well, yes. I mean, I think they do, because the problem with bird strikes is that the problem, despite all of the bird management control that takes place at almost every airport in the United States, the problem's not getting better. In fact, it's getting worse because of wildlife conservation efforts. In fact, we've seen a dramatic, almost 100-fold increase in the population of Canadian geese across the country. So this is a real problem. In fact, we can tell you that since 1975, at least domestically, there have been 5 large airlines that have crashed. Let me check that. Worldwide, 5 large airlines that have crashed because of direct result of bird strikes. One of the most serious, of course, was in 1960 in Boston, Eastern Airlines, where I think about 60 passengers died in that crash. And that crash then led to some strict measures which were implemented by the FAA, in that modern jet engines today must be able to withstand an impact of a 4-pound bird. The problem with that is that there are about 26 species of birds that weigh a heck of a lot more than that, and birds mostly fly in flocks. So even that standard does very little really to protect against flying into a flock of birds.
And that was actually my question, what is being done to address this? And we heard from one of the witnesses, who was actually a mechanic, I believe, who was talking about, you don't know what kind of bird it was actually that struck that engine.
Schumer just said it was a flock of geese. A flock of geese.
Which are very large birds.
They are large birds. And you've got to assume that in this case, if both of those engines flamed out, then that engines, both of them, ingested more than one bird. And what happens is that even with one bird, the blade basically flies off and hits other blades within that engine. It has a cascading effect, and it just shuts that engine down almost immediately.
Oh. Is there a solution out there, Jim, as you've been looking at it late this afternoon, is there a solution on how to deal with this problem, one that makes conservationists happy, and one that deals with the real serious issue of the danger to the flying public?
Well, there is, but nothing is fail-safe. We know that the Port Authority, through the years, has spent tens of millions of dollars at its 3 airports trying to face off this issue with geese and seagulls and you name it that's out there. A lot of these control management measures involve loud noises, almost like a gun that fires or a cannonball that fires. And when they, the air traffic control or pilots report seeing a flock of geese in the area, that management, that sound, that loud noise will sound and scare the birds off.
So what is the next step? What is the next step beyond just a sound alarm, if you will?
Well, I don't know, but one thing that we also, I think, have to put into the equation here is we don't know exactly where this plane struck the birds. I
mean, where it ran into the birds.
Exactly.
Did it run into immediately on takeoff? Was the plane already aloft? How high up was it?
And it's a key point because as anyone who flies in and out of LaGuardia knows, and we spoke to a pilot just a few minutes ago, 30 years as a commercial pilot, he said this is the toughest airport to fly out of and fly into, bar none. anywhere
will tell you
in the
that.
world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because it has intersecting runways, and these runways are fairly short. One pilot once described it to me as landing on an aircraft carrier or taking off on an aircraft carrier, because 3 sides of it are water. And that's got to sort of factor into the equation. Possibly, if they hit those birds on the runway, did he have enough runway to lift off, or better yet, did he have enough runway actually to stop before takeoff?
Because it brings to mind those runways there being so short, being such a small airport. Where are these birds nesting? I can think out at Kennedy Airport, they have a lot of grassy areas surrounding the airport. They don't have that at LaGuardia. So I wonder where these birds are, and how do you follow up where they are, and how are you able to get to them, to get them out of there?
Well, I mean, if you excuse the pun, as the crow flies, there's actually lots of islands that are out there in the Sound, very close to LaGuardia.
So they could have been nesting on those islands.
Exactly, and they could be, nesting, living on those islands, and that could be part of the problem.
I'm sure this is going to be the next step on. They're going to try to figure out where these birds are.
Bet.
Okay, well, we would just want to update some of the numbers right now. We are getting word that there were actually 148 passengers on board, 5 crew members, making that a total of 153 on board.
Yeah, 2 extra people on board, but 2 extra people that got out alive.
Yes,
so good for them. Thank goodness.
I'm at St. Luke's here, where they're bringing in many of the passengers that are actually on board that plane. Right now, 4 people are being treated here at the emergency. Just a few seconds ago, one of those passengers came in. We didn't get a look whether it was a man or a female, but take a look at this video. This is what the folks look like that came in a minute ago. They started arriving here at around 4 o'clock. The first was a married couple. The woman was overwhelmed by the swarm of media that is out here outside of the emergency room. The other person with her husband, he was still wearing his flotation device. The third person that arrived here was a woman. She arrived, we're now being told that she was actually a flight attendant on board that plane, and that she has a fracture. They're not sure whether it's a fracture to the leg or the arm. The public relations department there isn't sure. Of course, doctors know, but they're not telling us yet. Doctors say the biggest concern here, of course, is hypothermia. They're saying depending on what level of hypothermia the passengers are suffering from, that will determine the course of treatment. Listen to what this doctor told me a few minutes ago.
For people with mild hypothermia, which is just basically blankets, versus moderate or severe hypothermia, where we have more active measures. We have active rewarming with what we have bear huggers, versus we put in central venous lines into the deep veins and can actually pump in sort of heated fluids. So, people are being assessed right now. In addition to exposure, people can have other medical problems, which either complicate the situation or could be pregnant or whatever. So people are being assessed right now.
Now, I just want to give you an idea. I want to show you what's going on live behind me. These are all the media that have arrived here at St. Luke's. We're at the emergency room. A steady stream of ambulances is coming in and out. And, of course, every time someone comes in, we all want to know what level, how are they doing. The biggest thing also, besides the hypothermia, doctors say they have to, of course, look at any other medical conditions these passengers may have, whether they're pregnant, their age. Those can complicate hypothermia very much. Also, whether they were exposed to air or water. This was interesting. One doctor told me it makes a difference whether the hypothermia is from the air or the water. He said you do much better in cold air. Your body can hold up much better. In the water, though, it can take 1 to 2 minutes to develop severe hypothermia. Of course, some of these people were wet when they rescued from that aircraft. Doctors here in the emergency room are expecting another 10 to 12 passengers. Of course, we'll be right here. We'll try and get as much information about these passengers from the hospital here and get it to you. I'm going to toss it back into the studio.
I just want to make sure. We want to go now to Lauren DeFranco. She is at the Crown Plaza out near the airport. This is kind of the meeting center or the gathering place, Lauren, for all the families at this point. Is that right?
That's right, Diana. You can see there's a lot of activity going on here. We're here at the Crown Plaza Hotel. As you said, it's right across the street from LaGuardia Airport. We're told family members will be coming here to the hotel. This will be a staging area set up by police. You can see some of the activity going on here. This is where family members of those on board Flight 1549 can stay. The hotel will be accommodating those flying into LaGuardia Airport to reunite with loved ones. Right now, members of the media, you can see here, are waiting to see whether or not relatives will arrive here. And meeting area, but at this point, we haven't seen anyone come in. That's the very latest from the Crowne Plaza Hotel at LaGuardia Airport. Lauren DeFranco, Channel 7, Eyewitness News.
Well, Lauren, just to give you a sense, I know a lot of the folks are over in the pier area on the west side, and so perhaps because family members may have been watching this, they're headed there rather than heading over to the Crowne Plaza.
Well, that's true, Diana. You know, it's a matter of convenience. If people are flying in to see loved ones, they may come here. But again, as Stacey said before, this is a localized event, and a lot of people will be going into Manhattan for sure.
Okay, now we're going to go to Liz Layton, who actually shot some home video. She is live in our newsroom with more. Liz, what did you capture?
Hi, ladies. I'm a TV producer for True Entertainment, and we are based right on the Hudson River and 12th Avenue. So we had an amazing vantage point of the river. I was sitting at my desk, and my colleague exclaimed, "Oh my God, a plane landed in the river, crashed in the river." But her first word was landed. So we all rushed to the windows. I asked my colleague Jared Hacker to please grab a video camera, and we started rolling. What you'll see is we witnessed the plane almost sitting on the Hudson, almost like a toy plane, just kind of sitting in the tub, and then it started to just slowly go down. The nose went down first, and then it was very quickly submerged, and then the tail was showing, and all along, my colleagues and I are trying to guess how many people, how big's the plane, how long can people be, in this submerged, vessel with enough oxygen and without any, leaking going on.
As I watch that, Liz, I'm trying to get a sense of direction here as to where the nose is pointed.
The nose is almost pointing northeast, kind of in the direction of the George Washington Bridge. So it's almost like it came from LaGuardia and did like a spin.
You're saying that, and this is the first time I'm noticing that, but it looks like the pilot was turning around.
Yeah,
he must have done a turn somewhere because the flight path out of LaGuardia wouldn't have had him headed that way, right?
Exactly. So I didn't see the plane go down. I mean, what you're seeing right now, I saw it just moments before, and the plane was in that position. So I don't really know how it kind of made that turn around. Maybe the engines were still on and caused it to do a little turn.
And there's also a possibility currents in the river could have turned it too.
That's very
so
true.
We're sitting here just speculating.
And we actually heard that from one of the witnesses that we spoke with here on the news desk, that they could see that the tide is what actually turned this plane.
That would make sense. Yeah, so as you can see, immediately, so the plane was sitting there just kind of solo, and within, I would say, 2 minutes, a ferry just jetted out from the Manhattan side of the river. And it was one of those ferries that goes back and forth to Hoboken, New Jersey. And it went right out, almost as if it was, anticipating this happening. The reaction time of that ferry getting there was so quick. And I guess that they were kind of waiting to see if there were passengers that were going to be in the water.
Yeah, thank goodness for that ferry coming by. Quick reaction from them.
Absolutely.
Liz, could you tell us, did you count the time, I guess, between how long it took for that ferry to get there and how long it took for folks to start getting on board that ferry?
It was I didn't see anyone get on board the ferry. What we saw was one ferry went out, then it seemed to be like 3 more ferries were out almost within moments, and then a small police boat really took off and kind of wedged its way in there. So within, I would say, 5 to 7 minutes, there were a grouping of these ferry boats and the one police boat around the plane, to the point where you couldn't really see the plane anymore. You could really just see the tail part of the plane, and it was unsure as to what was going to happen next.
Okay, Liz, we want to thank you for sharing this video with us.
Of course.
It's absolutely fascinating to see this. This video that you've been seeing is literally within moments after that plane, that jet, going down in the Hudson. So thanks again, Liz, for sharing it with us.
We want to go to Nigel Lowell right now, who's an aviation expert. Nigel, thank you for joining us.
Hi, it's good to be with you.
Nigel, we've been talking this evening about a possible bird strike. We heard from the senator that geese were involved. Can you walk us through what happens? What does the pilot do when he's faced with this situation?
Well, the engines on all airliners are tested to swallow birds and keep running. But there comes a point with the size or the number of birds where even an engine that's passed all these tests just shuts down and starts to break up inside. it's very unusual for an airplane to lose both engines to birds. It has happened. There was an AWACS, Air Force AWACS radar plane taking off from, I think it was Elmendorf Air Force Base in Alaska many years ago. And that came down, and I think 20-plus people on board were killed. There was another one, a DC-8, I seem to remember, came down in Canada full of troops, 250 there. And the problem bird is the goose. It's a big bird, and if it's a flock of them, they can really do a lot of damage.
Nigel, you're almost sounding a little skeptical that a flock of birds could have brought down this Airbus 320. Are you skeptical?
No, not at all.
No, okay. I was reading something into your voice there. But so the theory that a flock of geese got sucked up into this engine, that's what you think at this point?
Well, not necessarily geese, but they're always a prime suspect because they're so large. But a large number of smaller birds can have the same effect. But I have to say, these pilots did a fantastic job.
I was going to ask you about that. You know, this pilot really brought this jet down on that river, and people have described it not as a crash landing, but just as landing.
Yes, that's really remarkable. Ditching a jet is an extremely risky thing to do, and you know, we look at the passenger briefing cards in the seat back pocket, and they show this picture of an airliner just floating in the water, and pilots tend to regard that with some skepticism.
And clearly the pilot here, thinking about the passengers and the way that the pilot landed the plane, giving the passengers more time to be able to get out.
Yeah, it was all done right. They left the gear up, from what I can gather, the landing gear, which means you're presenting a much smoother surface to the water, so it's less likely to dig in and flip over. That was an excellent move, and apparently the back doors were kept closed, which kept the airplane afloat, or helped keep it afloat. Obviously, an airliner's cabin is pretty well sealed because it's designed to stay pressurized up at altitude. So it's also pretty good at keeping water out as long as doors don't get opened.
I was going to say, how quickly would water start coming into that cabin?
Well, judging by the pictures, it's sitting tail low. So I'm thinking some quick-thinking flight attendants, and this is where training comes in for them, just to the extent that it does for the pilots. They didn't open those rear doors, and that was another lifesaver right there.
Nigel, we've been talking a little bit about the mechanics of the plane and how for a bird strike, according to new standards that are in place, if one bird actually goes through a plane of this measure, should be able to withstand that. Can you talk about some of the standards that are in place and some of the mechanics of the plane?
Well, I don't know the exact weight of the bird they use in bird strike tests, but it's an integral part of certifying certainly the engines, and it's taken into account for the windscreens as well.
Nigel, NTSB is going to be on the scene shortly. Obviously, their first issue is getting this big jumbo jet out of the water. That's going to be a task in and of itself. You may not know this off the top of your head, but what does one of these things weigh?
An A320 max takeoff weight, I'm guessing, is about 180,000 pounds, 90 tons.
And the fact that it has water in it, which I think Jay was telling me a gallon of water can weigh 10 pounds?
Yes, it can. It can weigh close to 10 pounds. So I think the fact that it's still floating, and judging by the pictures on the screen, it seems to be still floating. That's a good sign that it hasn't taken on too much water. Also, if it was taking off, the fuel tanks were probably not jam-packed with fuel, but they didn't have a lot of room for air in there. So it's really remarkable it's all stayed afloat.
And Nigel, I have a question for you. We heard from a few witnesses that they saw an explosion, particularly this one student who was on her way home from school. She talked about seeing an explosion. Would we see something like this with a bird strike in the engine? Yes, you would. When the bird goes in, it's suddenly a large chunk of bones and feathers, not to get too morbid about this, but it's a pretty solid object when it goes into an engine, and the blades
which normally are just cutting air and propelling it through the engine, when they encounter these solid bits of bone and stuff, the whole engine starts to come apart inside if enough debris goes through it.
Nigel, we've been talking about what measures NTSB can take to deal with this, and I know this is an extremely rare situation, these bird strikes, but what kind of measures can be taken by the NTSB to deal with this, or the FAA? And I don't know exactly which agency would handle it, but which one would handle it, and what kind of measures are out there that could be possibly used to deal with this?
Well, the NTSB comes up with recommendations for the FAA, which is the agency that actually makes the rules. I don't want to prejudge anybody's investigation here, that's for sure. It's hard to say, really, how airplanes and engines can be made any more resistant to this. The engines have a diet of air, and when a large number of birds go inside it, it really disrupts everything. And, you know, it's not as if you can put a mesh fence in front of the engine. It has to have unobstructed flow of air. So, as you say, it is a remarkably rare occurrence for birds to shut down all the engines on an airplane.
Okay, Lee Goldberg on our set here has a question for you.
Nigel, just to get an idea of what the passengers were experiencing and the quick action of the crew and pilot as they're landing, and you said the tail was going down, and then you have the nose up. If they want to keep the water out, do they actually, is the protocol to open up one of the doors? Do they keep it shut? And then, you know, they're concerned about being submerged there where they break windows? I mean, what is the thinking that they go through there?
I'm not familiar with the exact procedure they're taught, but I would think the first thing to do is look out of the window and make sure there's no water above it. And if there is, don't open the door or the hatch or anything. It came to rest tail low, and they were